Wanting to recapture a lost sense of childhood wonderment is a big reason I became a vintage action figure collector. Well, that, and the fact that I think that vintage toys are cool as hell and rank among the very best examples of modern pop art. Today, vintage toy collecting has become an incredibly popular hobby, with older generations wanting to track down the favourite toys from their youth. The baby boomer generation goes after a lot of tin toys and items from the early 60s. I was born at the tail end of Generation X, and I collect everything from Action Man and G.I. Joe to Star Wars, Mego and the $6 Million Man. While Generation Y usually collect He-Man, Transformers or any of the other wide variety of toys produced in the 1980s. For those new to the hobby, the prospect of starting out a vintage toy collection can be quite daunting, but never fear, Analog Toys is here with our top tips for collecting vintage action figures. Hello toy fans, my name is Tony and welcome back to the Analog Toys YouTube channel. Now, it doesn't matter if you're just starting out collecting vintage toys or if you're an experienced collector. I hope that the tips we offer you today will help you out in your toy hunting adventures. This is, after all, a fantastic and thoroughly rewarding hobby, but there are some pitfalls to look out for and some keys to success. So without further ado, let's get started. Tip number 1. Set a budget. Toy collecting can very quickly become a very expensive hobby, so you have to make sure that you collect within your means. When I first started out, I would set aside a certain amount of money each month for my newest purchase. But it can be difficult, especially when you're offered a bargain or something that you've really been hunting for. Tip number 2. Condition is king. It doesn't matter whether you collect vintage toys or classic cars, it's all about condition. Condition, condition, condition. That doesn't mean you have to collect the best condition items. You just need to understand that with a better condition comes a higher price tag, and you need to be careful not to overpay for items that are less than mint. When I started out collecting vintage Action Man figures, I would often purchase lower condition items to keep the cost within my budget, and this is sometimes a good way to go. You'll find that the longer you collect and as your collection grows, you'll also start upgrading items in your collection for ones that are in better condition. Hand in hand with condition is also completeness. A lot of the value in vintage action figures actually comes from their original accessories, and again, complete figures will always command a higher price tag. Where you might not necessarily need to collect the best condition vintage toys, I do recommend trying to collect complete toys. Condition can always be improved upon, but sometimes seeking out missing accessories can be a costly nightmare. Tip number 3. Focus your collection. Vintage Action Man toys were sold over an 18-year period, and quite often collectors will only collect the Action Man toys from the era that they were born into. But as a child, I was given hand-me-down toys from the 1960s and the early 70s. So when I got into collecting, it was very difficult for me just to stick to the Eagle Eye era. And today it has made it extremely difficult for me to focus my collection. Take Star Wars for example. Vintage Star Wars action figures are hands down the most popular brand of vintage toys to collect today. But the sheer scope of items that are available can make it difficult to know where to start. If you rush out trying to collect everything, it will become very costly very quickly. This is where you need to focus your collection. Start off by just collecting the toys from your favourite movie. Or you could go a step further and only collect toys from a certain Star Wars environment. When I started out, I only collected the Hoth toys from The Empire Strikes Back. Once you complete your first focus area, you can move on to another. Some collectors like to collect the toys they had when they were children. Others like to collect the toys they didn't have. Either way, focusing is a great way to guide your collection and allow it to grow organically. Tip number 4. Patience is a virtue. Don't rush out and try to buy everything. Also, don't overpay for a toy just because you really want it. Be patient, and over time you'll always find the toys you're looking for, and at a price you can afford. I remember when I first started collecting vintage Action Man as an adult, I wanted everything. But collections take time. In fact, one of the most appealing things about collecting vintage toys is that they are hard to find, and it takes both dedication and patience to amass a worthy collection. Tip number 5. Loose or packaged. Finding vintage toys in their original packaging is far more difficult and costly than finding them loose. But as is quite often the case with vintage toys, sometimes the packaging can feature artwork that is more appealing than the toy itself. If you decide to collect mint boxed or carded toys, the cost of collecting will rise exponentially. For example, a complete but loose Yoda figure from The Empire Strikes Back can be picked up for around $40 to $50. But the same figure sealed on an original card can fetch $250 to $300. Furthermore, if that carded figure is graded and cased by AFA or UKG, the price could even go as high as $500. Most of my Action Man collection consists of original vintage loose items, but I do like to collect a select few carded outfits, and I have a real passion for boxed figures, since the artwork reminds me of going into toy shops when I was a kid. Something to be cautious of when collecting vintage toys in original packages is items that can perish. For example, the rubber O-rings in the 3 3/4 inch G.I. Joe action figures break down over time and the figures fall apart. You'll have to ask yourself if it is really worth investing in a carded figure if that figure is eventually going to fall apart inside the bubble. However, collecting mint-graded items, while expensive, can make for a good investment, since you know exactly what you're getting. But I'll never suggest to anyone that they should collect toys as an investment. The market is just too unpredictable. Simply collect what you love. Tip number 6. Bargains come in bulk. I've been buying bulk-sized collections of vintage toys for years, and I've found it the best way to get yourself a bargain. Buying bulk collections of vintage toys obviously costs more than buying individual smaller items, but if you're seeking a few toys or figures and you can find them in a bulk lot, by the time you part out the collection, you'll most often find that you got those few toys a lot cheaper than if you'd purchased them individually. In addition, spare figures and accessories can be sold off or, even better, used as trade bait with other fellow collectors. Tip number 7. Networking. Networking with fellow collectors is not only the best way to track down the toys you're looking for, but also the best way to learn about your hobby. I've always found that passionate collectors, well, all they want to talk about is the toys that they're interested in, and you can learn a hell of a lot from people who've been collecting a long time. A good way to meet fellow collectors is by attending collector conventions and getting to know the collectors who are interested in the same toys as you are. Another way is to look up online forums. The internet is chock-a-block with forums where vintage enthusiasts passionately discuss their favoured toys. An added benefit I've found from networking with fellow collectors is that some of them may have the toys that you've been searching years for. Often a passionate collector is reluctant to sell because they want to know that the item is going to a good home. Once they understand that you're as passionate about a toy brand as they are, they'll feel more comfortable selling a few of their more prized items. Tip number 8. Research. Our final tip is to do your research. The more you know about a hobby, and in particular the pricing, the less likely you are to be ripped off. Communicating with fellow collectors in online forums and on Facebook pages is a great way to ask questions and learn about your chosen hobby. Another way is through published collecting guides. There are a lot of these books available, so choosing the right one for you will take a little research of its own, but getting the right book can be an invaluable asset when trying to piece together vintage toys. Some of these books also include price guides, but I would avoid these like the plague. Vintage toy prices can fluctuate radically, and most of the price guides in books are already out of date by the time the books reach store shelves. A good way to keep up to date with current pricing is to watch what people sell toys for in online forums, or by watching auctions on eBay. Pay particular attention to sold listings, but always remember, at the end of the day, any collectible is only worth what someone is willing to pay for it. So those are our top 8 tips for collecting vintage action figures. I really hope you found this video both interesting and educational, and if you do have a specific question about a toy you're trying to collect, leave us a comment in the section below or contact us through our Facebook page. I'm Tony from Analog Toys. Thank you all for watching, and please don't forget to click subscribe.